Okay, everyone, we're a couple minutes past the hour. Again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to meet with us. This is our quarterly licensing brief, where we'll be discussing different hosted solutions around Microsoft technology. And I would say, if you were to ask me, well, what's our goal for today? It's really to help educate you and coach you on some of these changes, how these changes may impact your business, and really what's happening in this world we call SPLA and volume licensing. So what are we going to do today? Well, for those that had the privilege of sitting through one of my presentations, you know I always like to start off with a quote. Well, I jumped ahead. So who said it? Robert Frost. And the quote is, Office 365 and SPLA are two roads diverge in yellow wood, and sorry, I cannot travel both. But then again, it's Microsoft. Perhaps, maybe, I can. So, as ridiculous as that quote is, I would say it's kind of somewhat true. Office 365 and this program we call SPLA are becoming more and more, we call it intermingled. You know, they're two different programs, yes. They're both competing against one another in one way, shape, or form. But yet, in a strange way, I would say they also complement one another. If you look at programs such as the Cloud Solution Program, CSP, Office 365, and the what they call shared computer activation. And I would say from the service provider's perspective, more and more of you are getting into the program called managed services. And so there's a lot of moving parts, right? And I would say the one thing that's always consistent with Microsoft is change. And so when you look at this slide and you say, okay, what are some of these changes? I'd say in the past 10 plus years, if you combine Justin and I's experience, it's 20 plus years in managing volume licensing and SPLA. There's all these moving parts and changes going on. There's, like I mentioned, the CSP. There's Office 365 and shared computer activation. There's Azure. There's a program called shared servers, which used to be called license mobility. And I'm not talking about license mobility within server farms, but really license mobility over to a third-party data center or a third-party shared servers. For those that were renting PCs, right? Well, that's gone. And I would say no matter if you're in volume licensing or SPLA, there's a big change in Windows, right? It's moving to a core-based licensing structure. So on today's call, we're going to talk about some of these changes. Not all, but some of them. But I think it all starts with, well, where are we at today? How do we manage all these moving parts? What does our future hold? What do we plan on doing 2-3 years down the line? And I'd say on the next couple of slides, I'll let my colleague, Justin Van Spybrook, walk us through a program that we titled SAM for SPLA. And I'm really excited about this, one, because we put a lot of resources behind it, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Because not only do we want to be able to track your usage, we want to monitor it on an ongoing basis, and ultimately, we want to get it right. Because we could go through this entire exercise, but if we're missing one piece or another, and it's not right, it really doesn't do us any good. So Justin, if you can hear me, you can.
I can hear you.
Take us through the next couple slides around software asset management for SPLA. That'd be helpful.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? All right. So let's jump right in. I am. I'm just not able to
Yeah.
advance the slides.
We can hear you, Justin. I don't know why Brett can't.
All right, so Brett, thanks for the intro. Typically, I would have led with esteemed colleague, but I'm not going to fault you for it. For those that I haven't had a chance yet to meet, my name is Justin Van Spryberg. I work with Brett LaForge in concert to run our Hosted Solutions group, of which SPLA plays a large part in. But as Brett alluded to, more and more on the hosted side of the house, we are finding that there is overlap and either competition or complementary solutions that are arising either from working within your own data center, working within Microsoft directly through their online services in a variety of capacities, whether it be volume licensing, CSP, or if you're working with a local or national or international service provider whereby you're consuming any number of services from them that involve a third-party data center. And again, core to our message is that a number of these topics could likely warrant at least a 30-minute conversation of themselves, in which you will likely see more collateral coming out. And based upon your feedback, we're always happy to set up a session that could speak more in detail. We are going to try to cover what we think are the high points today. But for us at Software One, we built a business on software licensing, advisement, and consulting. And so at the core of any of these changes, especially when one is anticipating moving into a new model or trying to evaluate what do these changes mean for their environment, or whether or not it's going to be beneficial for how you want to consume these technologies, we really start at understanding what it is you own. And so as Brett mentioned, we have a program, Software Asset Management, specifically for SPLA. And I apologize, anybody that's worked in the Microsoft world, we tend to bandy acronyms a little too easily at some point. So if at any point I delve into that and I need clarification, my buddy George will remind me. So SAM for SPLA, Software Asset Management for Service Provider Licensing Agreement. So a Service Provider License Agreement is a model specific for third-party hosters. And traditionally, those have been the folks that are doing direct access to Microsoft technologies. But more and more, we're finding that requirements for this licensing model are cropping into what we're traditionally on the volume licensing side of the house. And so while what I'm going to talk to you is perhaps more geared to a service provider, it's not necessarily unique. So we at Software One really feel that SAM has unfortunately suffered from a misbranding, making it a four-letter word, by virtue of some of our customers having, let's say, unpleasant interactions with certain software publishers. I'm not going to name names. You see Microsoft on here, but if anybody's been through a publisher audit, they can empathize with how intense, how labor resourceve, and then hopefully they're not spending too much to satisfy any compliance gaps that they may have had. So when we talk about what our offering is built for, specific to the service provider community, it takes on a different level of connotation, because at some point, not to oversimplify, but if we're talking about the traditional enterprise and products and devices that are being consumed for internal use, at a basic level, once we're able to gather that information, we're able to quickly sort of determine what your exposure is to a publisher, right? So once we've gathered the data, once we've scanned the environments and looked at the devices and compared the profiles, ultimately we arrive at what we call an effective license position. And simply put, like I said, an over-distillation here is I have 500 machines, I have Office installed on 500, but I only have licenses for 300. So at a fundamental level, we're saying, well, your potential exposure to Microsoft in this instance is 200 copies of Office, and there's a price tag associated with that. When it comes to hosting providers, if you're a service provider, you understand that you have a monthly obligation to report to Microsoft. And so when these asset management engagements, which I would venture to say when it's done by the publisher, it's an audit, because SAM for us means systems of processes and procedures and people. But if you go through this audit, Microsoft and any other publisher working in an MSP capacity reserves the right to really go back anywhere from 3 up to 5 years, should they so choose. And so if a potential gap is discovered in month 1, there is the potential for them to extrapolate that backwards up to 12, 36, potentially even 60 months. And inevitably, it is sort of guilty until proven innocent. So if this gap had existed today, the worst case scenario is it could have gone back 12 months, 36, what have you. So we're not here to lead with fear, but the reality is there. If there is a compliance gap due to a misunderstanding, misinformation, or miscommunication, it really doesn't resolve the issue. And so what we're looking to do is help our partners and customers get in front of that with a variety of services. Now, the other point I want to make is that typically when any publisher is engaging in an audit, they are likely, and I can speak specifically to Microsoft, they are engaging a third-party organization to the likes of a KPMG or Deloitte. Now, to utilize those organizations, there's a pretty hefty price tag. You're talking anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 to $25,000 to launch a full-scale engagement. And so, as a for-profit entity, these publishers are typically looking to get anywhere from a 3, 5, or 10 to 1 greater investment on reviewing these organizations that they've identified as likely for an asset management review. So the Software One perspective, when we wanted to build this out, understanding that the complexities of a multi-tenant hosted environment are far and beyond that of perhaps the traditional enterprise, we went out and hired folks that had worked for those third parties. So we've added to our SAM practice by taking the folks that have years of experience in delivering these exact same engagements to publishers that they're hired. But in that, we've also identified that not everybody needs the same sort of SAM solution. So SAM is not a one-size-fits-all for any organization. It depends upon where you're at, what your size is, complexity of your offering, the amount of internal resources you have, also the amount of knowledge that you have about publisher use rights and how you're maintaining that upkeep of that, which here at Software One we're dedicated to helping you with. So at a basic level, what we're trying to do is understand what today is, look at what might be awry, certainly provide a recommendation on how to solve that, provide the roadmap, and in certain instances, we're able to help go backwards and see what that historical compliance gap may have been. Now, in addition, like I said, to do a full-on engagement could be a price tag of upwards of $10,000. We understand that, compliance, while obviously a priority for everybody, might not be something which is always budgeted. So we do have an array of services. We are able to do what we call a key health snapshot, where we can say, let's take a percentage of your environment and look at perhaps what a high productivity workload would be, review that, and if we find perhaps major errors in that, it may warrant a further investigation. However, if we find that to be relatively clean, you might have enough information to go out and spot check the rest. We can also do on-site engagements where we review reporting practices and do a bit of knowledge transfer for a single day sort of consulting fee. We're able to do what we call predictive lifecycle support management services, where perhaps we're not scanning your environment, but you're giving us access to data which says these are the products that we have, and then what we're able to do is provide a roadmap to, hey, when do support cycles end for that? What are upcoming licensing changes, and map them back specifically to your environment. And in future states specific to SPLA, we're also anticipating putting in some metering and reporting tools. So from a metering perspective, that's somewhat in place today. Obviously, if we had a reporting tool that was able to automate it, I think Software One would be making much more money since the tool is non-existent today. But what I'm really trying to drive home is the importance of SAM cannot be understated, because you have a contractual obligation to allow the publisher to review your environment, and if you owe them money, you're going to be forced to pay it. So what we can do is at least help get you to a point of sanity internally where there's assurance that you know exactly what it is you're reporting, both from a compliance standpoint, but also that you're only paying exactly what you need to. So that's the other point that we try to drive home, is our two main pillars within the hosting community at Software One is, above all, maintain compliance, but right there underneath it is only give Caesar what's due unto Caesar, right? So we want to make sure that you're optimized on the licensing perspective, and we do find that in many of our SAM engagements, we're able to make recommendations that might be able to curtail some of that reporting spend. So let's see here. That's what I had here. Just kind of who we've helped. Like I said, we've been in front of and noticing a number of trends that have put service provider license agreement or SPLA requirements into other arenas, specifically healthcare. We've noticed that there's been some unintentional application hosting, and Brett and I are finding this is to be bleeding across many other verticals. So if you haven't had a SPLA 101 and you're interested in what it is we're seeing, by all means, feel free to reach out, send Matt a follow-up email and say, hey, I'd like to be interested, and we're happy to share that information with you. We've been doing this for a number of years. For the traditional service provider, for anybody that's in the hosting community already or in SPLA, the primary value that we're bringing is direct access to expertise. So when you're working with Software One, you're always going to be talking to somebody that has years of experience in the SPLA program. We're aware of the changes. We're trying to make this information widely available. We understand that not everybody has time to read a newsletter or attend our webinars. So we're happy to set up individual calls, kind of walk through the environments, understand what it is you're using. And as part of that, what we also feel like we do above and beyond is we're not just SPLA specific. So I have almost 10 years on the volume licensing side of the house as well. And as we talk about some of these changes to Windows Server and around shared computer activation, around programs like CSP, we're starting to see, again, that bleed over between how customers are consuming Microsoft licensing are no longer just through traditional volume licensing in in-house setups. So Microsoft's promoting their cloud. There are cloud providers already. There are cloud providers that have specialties in online services for Microsoft, be it Office 365. There are also alternatives to Microsoft's online solutions, be it Azure or some of their productivity, which these service providers have been doing for 20 plus years. So how, as an end user, are you able to understand your options? And then as a service provider, how are you understand these options in order to communicate to the end user? Because now we're, again, crossing the streams, if you will, between volume licensing and SPLA. And then lastly, if anybody falls in this boat where if you're an ISV or independent software vendor, namely you've created an application that is your own code that may be using other parts of third-party publishers like Microsoft or Oracle as the underlying infrastructure. Again, as you look to take those applications to market, what we're seeing is a trend from internal consumption, right? Say Software One created an application that we've used to help track licensing that we want to make available as a software as a service. That transition, unfortunately, crosses lines between volume licensing and SPLA. So again, the purpose is for today is we really run the full gamut of trying to help people understand how to best use what they own, but then also how to make the best purchasing decisions for the technologies that they want to consume in the future. And so with that, my blurb about how we've done that, I want to give it back over to Brett. We're going to talk specifically about a major upheaval into the rental PC program.
Hey, thanks, Justin. And I can hear you now, so technology is good. So good stuff. As Justin alluded to, I mean, there's all these changes and all these moving parts, and certainly sometimes it's difficult to manage, but that's what we're here for, to help and walk you through those changes. And one of the bigger changes, and one of the more surprising changes, in my opinion, and again, this doesn't affect everyone, but it does affect some of you, is around rental PCs. And so what I'm talking about here is any organization that essentially was leasing a PC out to a third party as a service through SPLA. And for those that don't know, previously, if you wanted to rent a desktop out to a third party, you, one, would have to have a machine with a qualified OEM license pre-installed on it. And then second to that is you would have to license or report via your SPLA a Windows 10, Windows 8 upgrade license on that same device. So essentially what's happening is you would be double licensing for that same device. And the announcement is this: Microsoft removed that Windows 8, Windows 10 upgrade license through SPLA as of last month. So if you are in the rental PC business, you could stop reporting that Windows 8, Windows 10 upgrade license, because now it's included with the use rights within OEM as well as within volume licensing. So it's a pretty significant change. I will say if you're reporting Office Pro and Office Standard on these devices, you can continue to do so through SPLA. But again, these changes, for volume licensing customers, it does allow them to rent or lease those PCs out to the end users. And again, for service providers, just stop reporting those SPLA SKUs. So what you would need to do is, one, download what they call the Agreement for Leasing or Renting Certain Microsoft Software Products Guide. That sounds like a hoot and a great read. You essentially agree to those terms, and then you require your end user to agree to those licensing terms as well. Now, like with everything else in Microsoft, there are some limitations. And I'd say the biggest one is there's no Windows Enterprise license within this program. So essentially, you can't take a VDI image through a server environment. This is strictly for renting a device out to your end customers. So where it says that third bullet point, rental rights cannot be used with products installed on servers, that's essentially what they're talking about. And also, rental rights are limited to commercial use. So essentially what they're saying there is you can't use it for your own employees.
So Brett, and I want to extrapolate this a step further, because what we've also seen sometimes during the course of divestitures and acquisitions, right, is perhaps I'm a large organization, I'm acquiring another organization, but the deal has yet to go through, right? And I want to upgrade their hardware, and I want to provide a new desktop. Is it correct then, since there is no longer the rental PC, that I can actually lease these laptops to the organization that I'm acquiring, and actually it appears I can put Office on via some of these volume licensing programs, even though they're not officially owned?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting scenario.
And I bring it up only because this is what we're trying to do, and I realize perhaps there are some folks on the line that some of the hosting bits of this might not be as applicable to, but I think what we're trying to drive here is we are going to talk about some of the universal changes to Windows Server. And again, from my perspective, a proper SAM environment is going to aid customers if they don't have it internally. But even when we talk about these updates to the rental PC, this is about also being a consumer, but also how you might be able to use the changes in these programs as you are going through using your own volume licensing. So just wanted to throw that out there, and then also, again, call out that for anybody that's looking at it and saying, oh, I can buy Windows via volume license program, put it on here, that VDA is still not available through this program, which was something that I was kind of hoping a loophole would have been introduced, but they shut it down. So
correct. And there are no plans to offer VDA, VDI through SPLA.
Right.
So what does this all mean? So some of the eligible programs, if you take a look at this chart, obviously OEM licenses for Windows 10, Windows 8, Windows 7 Professional, MPSA, Open, and Select Plus as well. I did put on here a couple scenarios that essentially say the same thing. So let's say you, as a SPLA customer, buy Windows 10 via an open agreement. You adhere to those rental terms that I mentioned on the previous slide, and then you lease it out to your end customer. Well, the way that would work programmatically is you would not license Windows via SPLA anymore, but those Office applications could still be reported under your SPLA agreement. And then in scenario 2, it says the same thing, only you're purchasing those licenses via OEM instead of through Open. And again, you must adhere to those licensing terms set forth by Microsoft. Ironically, there's nothing to sign to that agreement. It just says you have to follow those terms. And then, of course, your end customer has to follow the terms set forth in the volume licensing section and the product terms. But it's a big change. It's like I always mention, Microsoft is always changing programs on us, and certainly, we're here to assist. And I would say another big change that really affects everyone on this call is Windows Core licensing. And so the rumor is true. Windows is moving to a core-based licensing structure. I would say it's similar, but also different than SQL. For those that are familiar with SQL licensing, you could license the virtual cores or perhaps the physical cores. But Windows, what we're talking about here is the actual physical cores on each host. And there's an 8-core minimum per physical processor. And although we haven't seen the official price yet for these SKUs, I would say that it's been rumored that the cost of 8 cores is equivalent to 1 processor today, which basically aligns with when SQL made the change, 4 cores equal 1 processor. There's only 2 additions, Data Center and Standard. Data Center will allow the unlimited virtualization, and Standard will allow 1. And then, of course, System Center, for those that are licensing System Center Standard and Data Center will align to the Windows licensing terms, where it's licensed by Core. And then, of course, for those that are reporting the Core Infrastructure Suite, that too will be licensed by Core. So there's a big change. I would say, to tie this all together, when you look at this slide, I stole this from Microsoft. But if you're looking at this slide and you're saying, okay, well, what does this mean for me? On the left-hand side, you can see the physical processors per servers. Now, let's take, for an example, you just have 1 processor on that server, but you only have 4 cores. Well, because Microsoft says you have to license a minimum of 8, you're still forced to license 8 cores. It's similar to SQL in the fact that it's going to be sold in packs of 2 cores. So when you start getting into 10 and 12 cores, I would say that's where it starts making sense for those two core packs. And then, of course, as you add more processors on each servers, and you add more cores, of course, you're licensing accordingly. So again, the 2 takeaway is 1, you have to inventory the number of physical cores per server, and 2, there's a minimum of 8 cores per processor. And I think what Justin was alluding to as far as the software asset management, we could take a look at your environment and say, okay, well, how many cores are you running today on your systems, and what's the pricing impact of that? And that kind of aligns with this slide. And I would say if you're going to take away one thing, it's probably this one slide here. And I say that because you are bound by the terms of the service provider use rights when you sign your agreement. So whatever SPR is available when you sign, that's what you must adhere to. So if you take a look at this slide, right, you're thinking, okay, well, Windows 2016 is launched sometime in September, let's say. Well, what happens if you have an active SPLA agreement before it's in the SPR? Well, you can continue to license Windows 2012 and Windows 2008, or for those that are really living on the edge, 2003, by processor up until that agreement expires. So if you're not going to migrate to 2016 right away, it does give you a little more flexibility. So let's say we take a look at your environment, we say, man, you are licensing a lot of cores on these servers. If we transition to 2016 licensing model, your costs are going to go up, but yet you don't migrate to 2016 right away. One of the loopholes, you can call it a loophole, or one of the strategies that we might be able to take a look at is let's sign a new SPLA before those terms take effect. And I would say that that's one of the biggest benefits of SPLA, and one of the unknowns about SPLA is one, you could true up and true down on a month-over-month basis, but it also allows you to terminate a SPLA agreement and sign a new one. So if you look at this slide from left to right, and you say, okay, well, in July or August 2016, I'm going to sign a new SPLA before the use rights take effect, and I'm not going to migrate to 2016 for a long time. That gives you essentially 3 years to license by processor. And again, when you sign or renew a SPLA agreement, you're going to be forced to license by court no matter which edition you're running. So SPLA is a 3-year agreement, so in August 2016 you sign a SPLA, August 2019 you're forced to renew your SPLA. At that point in time, for any edition, you're going to have to license by core.
And Brett, if I can add, again, just to give some parity for the folks on the volume licensing side of the house, what we're talking about here, again, is specific to SPLA, but if you're not active in an SA agreement with Microsoft today, and you qualify for a server cloud enrollment, whereby you're covering all of your Windows servers with active software assurance in the latest version, you're actually doing something very similar. So if you haven't already, and you've kicked around the idea of maybe I should do an SCE, and you're really sort of worried or concerned about what the impact of moving to core will be for you in the future, you could employ a similar strategy through a volume license agreement whereby it locks you into that product set, and you can true up again. The ultimate reality is the conversion is going to happen, and it's whether it's going to be up to you whether you want to put yourself in a position where you're going to be forced to change as soon as you need to per Microsoft's dictate, or if you are going to commit to a strategy that says, hey, we want to buy ourselves some time. So just wanted to add the other side of the house, Brett, while we were talking about it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Justin. I'd say, the bottom line is let's take a look at your environment and how this may or may not impact you. But the reality is Windows is moving to cores, and there's no getting around that.
Right. And so I did see a question in the queue, how does this impact us from the virtual standpoint? Not to oversimplify, I don't think that you're going to find much cost difference on moving from a standard to a data center model from a virtualization standpoint. So, today you're still looking at basically a waterfall of number of VMs versus number of physical hosts. And in a similar capacity, you're going to be looking at the number of VMs per Windows server. You are always going to have to license the VM with the base level of cores. So kind of doing that core comparison, what's at your physical host level versus the numbers of VMs that you support is certainly step one if you've got a group of standalone servers. Now, there's another aspect of Microsoft that hasn't changed with this, which is basically peak capacity. So even in sometimes lightly virtualized environments with a number of hosts, if you're doing load balancing or live migration or vMotion, what have you, even if you're moving multiple VMs across multiple hosts, you may already find yourself in a data center situation. So good question. I don't think anything's necessarily crazily changed, but I think historically it's been vCPU. Now we're talking about, we're doing more V cores. What does that look like? If you have the data, we can help you make sense of it. If you don't, we can help you get the data and help you make sense of it. It's kind of how we'd work it out.
Yeah, and it's not always bad. So sometimes maybe core could be beneficial for you as well.
Right. I do, Clayton, I see you in the queue. Okay. Affect CSP host and guest cost. So host.
Yeah, I don't think that's been announced yet, but I would imagine that's moving to the host plus guest model.
Yeah, I
haven't seen anything official on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is personal speculation. That model specifically was dealt to deal with highly heterogeneous environments doing a lot of Linux. The primary benefit was getting rid of having to count was that peak capacity model. So I'd like to say that I wouldn't anticipate a change because the entire model itself being host and guest is counterintuitive to how they do everything else. So you can quote me on it, but you can quote me by saying that's my speculation. So.
Right, and it may be lower priced or something if it is licensed by core. We'll have to take a look at that.
Yep.
Good question, though. Okay, moving on. So, Justin, I think if you don't mind walking us through a couple of hosting options, I think one of the things we're going to talk about is Office 365 and that shared computer activation and what that really means for not just service providers, but also volume licensing customers.
Right. Yeah. So anybody that's either been involved with the hosting program, dealt with Office 365, like I said, the only static thing has been change. And so folks may or may not know that actually it's been 2 years now. It's just been, in my mind, undermarketed, and I think it's because, quite frankly, the folks in Bellevue haven't necessarily, in Redmond, haven't figured out all the ins and outs of it. But Microsoft has created a program called Cloud Solution Provider. And in essence, this was a program for Microsoft to go through their partner community to allow their partners to resell the online services through Microsoft. So again, this is more of a reselling channel, but these partners have to be able to provide managed support. So good news for anybody that has ever purchased Office 365 and had a subpar, to say tactfully, experience perhaps with a customer support agent. Microsoft has heard that, and they've tried to create a channel where, like they've done always historically, hey, our partners are deeply engaged in this technology. Let's use them as vehicles to increase customer satisfaction. And so by virtue of that, one of the long-standing issues within hosting in general has been an inability to take any sort of Office license that is owned and use it in a third-party environment. So, and you know, this is not unique to, this goes from the enterprise down to small business. They want to make an IT decision whereby they want to offload all their IT assets into a trusted partner, and perhaps they've got some remaining SA on Office, or you know, they've spent you know tens of thousands of dollars on these licenses internally. Unfortunately, the answer up until really 30 days ago has been there's nothing for you to do that allows you to really recoup any of that investment that you made. That has changed with this shared computer activation. Now, I want to also be very clear. When we talk about shared computer activation, we're talking about really a technology and a use right. It's not necessarily a program. So when I say CSP, you know, Cloud Solution Provider, when I say SPLA, Service Provider License Agreement, when I say volume licensing and all the acronyms that go with that, we're talking about licensing programs. You're not going to find a licensing program that is about shared computer activation. So SCA, when we talk about this, this is really saying, what can I do with the Office Pro Plus with the Office applications that I purchased through an online services vehicle. And as you can see here, what we're talking about is it allows it specifically Office Pro Plus for Office 365. So it has to be one of those plans, whether it's in the E plan, whether it's direct. It has to be an Office 365 Pro Plus subscription. This does not apply to standard volume licensing Office Pro Plus or anything else. So when we talk about this, I will beat this horse to death that this is only for an online services subscription. But what it allows you to do is it can be purchased through any program, through a volume licensing program, Open, MPSA, Enterprise Agreement, or through the Cloud Solution Provider Program, which, again, that's almost a topic we could do a whole another presentation on. But if you have purchased it, you have the ability to work with a select group of partners. Now, if I'm both on the partner and the end user side, my question would be, who are these partners? And if I want to become one, what is the means to get there? As typical with anything new with Microsoft, not to put them under the bus too much today, there's several steps. Basically, you first need to be in the SPLA program. You must be a CSP Tier 1 authorized, which basically means you're reselling the Microsoft Online Services stack and providing Tier 1 support, which has its own parameters. You have to sign the SCA form. There's actually a monthly fee that goes along with it. But once you get there, what it allows you to do as a hosting provider is it allows you to accept an end user's Office 365 Pro Plus or Project or Visio, it's any of the Office 365 applications, and actually install it on shared servers in a dedicated virtual environment for your customers. So I know that was a long-winded way to get there, but I just really wanted to be clear on all the details because it's such a new offering. And the other difference I want to make is anybody that's been around licensing for a long time, I think the logical inference here is this is a licensed mobility play. This sounds exactly like what I'm doing with my SQL, with my server products, and moving them to third-party data center. And that's, while I agree with that sentiment, it is not within the mobility program. So if you go into the product terms, you're not going to see Office Pro Plus through Office 365. It's available. So while, again, it makes sense to probably categorize it internally, the program itself is actually a wholly different offering. And darn it, I said program. The offering itself is wholly different, not a formalized program. Has to really be done in conjunction with a trusted partner. And by virtue of that, what you're doing is you're working with a hosting provider that's providing the underlying infrastructure in most cases and providing some sort of RDS access, unless you're providing your own, which we're going to talk about in a very busy slide that's forthcoming. So just very quickly, 3 scenarios that walk through what it is we're talking about when we speak to SCA. So scenario 1, end customer, software 1, we buy Office 365 with Office Pro Plus. We want to host it in a third-party shared environment with one of our partners down the street. And did not mean for that to back up. So what we did, we bought it via our enterprise agreement. We're going to transfer it to another provider. We verified that the provider we wanted to work with has all the appropriate authorizations. There's actually a list available, which we can provide. It's also online. We identify that it's in there. The partner, we sign up. We verify that we have the correct licenses. We run and activate our Office 365 deployments through the SCA protocol, and then we're up and running. And that service provider then also has the ability to supplement perhaps any other workloads that we want. So perhaps we're consuming SharePoint or some other applications. So again, this is the benefit that Microsoft's trying to extend is you're consuming our online services. You probably already have relationships with technology partners in your area that are helping you solve certain IT goals. We don't want to necessarily be no longer a bottleneck for that. So they're aware of many of these hybrid scenarios. You may consume Exchange online, but you're trying to get away from the device game. So if you're already doing certain things with these partners, you now have the ability to put one of those Office subscriptions in there and still consume it through the other devices that you want to install. Second scenario, Brett did this to be a little tricky for you. We buy Office 365 Business and look to transfer that license in the same capacity using the SCA activation rights. Where we fall short here is that the Office components through the Office 365 Business subscription is not Office 365 Pro Plus. So because of that, we're not able to leverage that and install those bits in the third party. Last, end customer buys Office 365 with Office Pro Plus through said service provider via their own cloud solution provider offering, CSP, and then want to use it. In that scenario, we're basically doing the same thing as number 1. Instead of buying direct through an LSP like Software 1, we're consuming through the service provider. That CSP model is definitely eligible, like we said, so long as it meets the definition of Office Pro Plus through Office 365. Doesn't really matter which purchasing vehicle, whether it's CSP or volume licensing, so long as the partner that you wish to work with has all those requirements. And again, if you're a partner and you're on the line, you say, how do we get there? If you're not already there, please reach out to us. We can help you get started along that path. Okay. So again, I hate to say intentionally busy because our job is not to confuse people, but what is it that Brett and I are doing on a day-to-day basis? Well, it's really helping folks on both sides of the equation here. I'm either an end user and I have licenses that I want to move into a third-party data center, or I'm a hosting provider and I want to understand what options can I enable for my customers that allow them to consume my technology. And what we find is there's really 3 scenarios that we're dealing with. There's dedicated hosting. And when we talk about dedicated, if anybody's worked with some of the other larger IaaS providers out there, we are talking about the hardware level. So all of these options, dedicated outsourcing, dedicated 1, and dedicated 2, it is only one customer's workloads that are being run on these servers. So outsourcing is basically, I'm colo. I own licenses. I don't want to upgrade my hardware. I've got a partner. They're going to take care of all that. We're going to move it over there. They're going to help us manage it, but it's, in essence, moving our data center to somewhere else, leveraging their assistance to help manage it. They're going to take care of all that work. Option two is more of a dedicated IaaS solution where I have my own applications. Now, this is what we often find confusing on the partner side, because typically when we talk about hosting customer-owned applications, whether it's Office, whether it's desktop OS in a VDI scenario, that usually throws up big red flags because neither of those products are eligible for licensed mobility. However, in this instance, again, the hardware is dedicated exclusively for the single customer's use. So if Software One wanted to employ this, we're saying, hey, look, perhaps we haven't upgraded our server environment in 7 years. And the cost to do so, and then all the factors that go into really outsourcing any component of your IT, we want them to do the infrastructure level. But since it's going to be on dedicated hardware, what that partner can do is provide licensing for any infrastructure component, Windows Server, SQL, and really most of the other server products. I can provide whatever licenses I own in there. And so long as we're not mixing and matching programs, namely I'm not giving some Windows and they're giving some, it's really an all or nothing gambit, they can supplement whatever it is I don't own. I don't even need software assurance in this capacity. Again, key reason here is because it's a dedicated server to my use. And the last bit is really more around very similar to the shared hosting, where I don't have anything. I just want to go to a partner that has a full turnkey hosted solution. Partner is going to basically spin up anything that the customer needs via their SPLA agreement for them. So dedicated hosting, again, when we talk about dedicated, and I get this a lot when folks are evaluating working with a particular partner, can I move my licenses? Dedicated is at the hardware level. Now, in the middle, we have probably what we see the most often, which is hybrid hosting. We've got license mobility through SA. Those products are clearly defined in the product terms. Namely, you as an end user are allowed to purchase certain products, server products, SQL, SharePoint, Exchange, what have you. So long as they have active software assurance, you can move them into a partner's data center. They host it on a Windows Server OS that they report via SPLA, and then you're able to not have to report SQL, use your own licenses in that capacity. Internally, you need to maintain software assurance for all the CALs and folks that are accessing it, but you can leverage somebody else's IaaS capabilities if you want to offload some of those workloads. A newer right, it's been out for a bit over a year, is RDS is now enabled. So if, say, you're consuming some sort of desktop as a service or application as a service, and you have remote desktop services CALs internally that have active software assurance, your service provider is actually able, should they be willing to leverage those and not have to charge you for that RDS access. And then the last bit, service provider is dedicated apps on shared infrastructure. Basically, again, this is the partner providing soup to nuts solution via SPLA. Customer can't use a volume license on here because there's really nothing to be able to do it since it's a shared environment in this capacity. And the last bit is shared hosting, multi-tenant. This is what a large percentage of our partners' business is that, look, we have multiple customers, multiple databases. We're not providing anything dedicated. If there's no dedicated VM or dedicated hardware, we're really not talking about any sort of licensing play for the end user. So again, very quick run through. This is what we live and breathe every day, is helping customers and partners walk through what is it can I do based upon what I own. And then not only that, helping them evaluate, okay, how should I purchase? Should I buy, SQL? If I go into SA renewal period, might save me a lot more money than having to continue to pay for it out of pocket. So it's not just about the knowledge. It's obviously knowledge and application, which we want to be here to help you through.
And one thing I want to add, Justin, is if you're in SPLA and you're talking to other organizations, selling solutions, the number one question I think your sellers need to be asking your customers is, do they have software assurance with these licenses? Because as you look at these different buckets of dedicated, hybrid, and shared, obviously the one common denominator is software assurance. If they do not have software assurance on any of these products, then you as a service provider are forced to dedicate or isolate that hardware out to one customer only.
Right.
And if they don't have software assurance, then it's SPLA. So
right.
There's also another program called SAL for SA. When you're talking about, I use the term program, but it's actually just a SKU. And so if your customer wants a true hybrid scenario where they want, for example, disaster recovery. Let's say they made the investment with Exchange with software assurance, but they say, hey, I'm worried about my Exchange server blowing up. Can you host this for me? Well, the answer to that is yes, because they made the investment with software assurance. You as a service provider then can report this lower price SKU. And I think it's like 20 cents.
Yeah, it's less than a nickel.
It's
less
really
than a quarter,
cheap.
Sorry.
It's really cheap, but so that's another option. I think that's a big miss by service providers.
Yeah, I see a question in the queue too. Here. Great point of clarification. Sometimes we tend to obfuscate this. When I talk about shared servers, I'm talking about shared hardware. So supporting multiple VMs, but dedicated at the virtual level. And so that's where SCA can apply. So it is again, it has that similar ability of license mobility where you're just dedicating the virtual OS, but it can run across multiple hosts. So great point. Definitely want to be clear on that. So when we talk about shared servers, it is about the shared host level.
Right. And again, Windows is not license mobility eligible. So.
Right. Yeah. But stay tuned because there's definitely changes coming down the woodwork. So, George, are there any questions that we can address here in the last few minutes that we have teed up here?
I think that was the big one I was going to lean on you for, so thanks.
Let's see here. I'm seeing some outsourcer enrollments. So yeah, I can address this loosely when it talks about the outsourcer enrollment. Outsourcer enrollment, from my experience, has really been allowing the partner to purchase volume licensing on the behalf of a customer and then manage it in that environment. So this is a good question because it is different when we just talk about an outsourcing scenario. When I talk about outsourcing from the customer perspective, we're simply talking about the customer buying their licenses under their name, but then putting it on a third party's hardware that's dedicated exclusively for their use. So this is a good point to bring up. We are talking about really differences, and take this for what it's worth. This is just every outsourcer conversation I've had with Microsoft Field has always been met with a ton of resistance. So I can't speak to anybody else's unique experience, but there definitely has to be high-level business justifications if that's a route that you want to pursue.
And then, Justin, actually, there is one question about volume licensing in the queue.
Let's see here. I'm looking. So say you're running two processors, each with 12 cores, upgrade to 2016. Are you going to need? So good question here. If I have active SA, what's this conversion going to mean? So what I have from Microsoft is that Windows Server should follow the same sort of migration abilities that they granted with SQL. This requires you actually to do some sort of SAM assessment, whether it's Microsoft funded or through a third party. But basically, if you're in an SA period still reporting under the old processor model and you have something that's in excess of the conversion rate, if you're able to document that through a SAM engagement, you should be allowed to renew SA only for the cores that you have. Now, again, it's going to be for the cores you have, but you'd be saving money by not having to buy a license in SA for those cores. So, yeah, good question. And I can confirm that. So I also want to say that was my understanding. Let's make a note to follow up and validate that that's the case. But that's as good as I know today. Let's see. Here, what else? Trying to think. Let's see here. Yeah, and sorry, Dan, we did get a little deep in the woods here. We are going to be endeavoring to have these at least bi-monthly. One of our commitments is trying to make sure that it's relevant and not just regurgitation of the marketing materials. So whenever we do put these together, we try to take the time, again, to apply it to what we're dealing with our customers, because nothing against the publishers, but, you know, they have their own marketing engines, and we're trying to build these on customer responses. So that's what we have on this bit today. Looking forward, there's going to be a number of announcements that we're going to make specifically from the hosting team around both enhancements, changes to Microsoft. We can already allude to. We know we're building out material, but as well as certain other publishers that we're starting to bring into our group. So by all means, if there's anything, the presentation and the webinar should be available to anybody that registered. If there's any specific questions, feel free to reach out to any of us on here. It's SPLA.us software one, which is our hosting alias. And, you know, let us know how we can help you out. So on behalf of our team, Software One, really want to thank everybody for attending. Thanks for the great questions. And like I said, if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know.